Monday, March 7th. YouTube is just waking up from the weekend. Everyone was out seeing the Batman. The cinema was a hub of life, warm, comfortable. But now everyone steps out into something much colder as they make their way home. The discourse. When Batman was created over 80 years ago by Bob Kane and Bill Finger, he was envisioned as a cross between a hard-boiled noir protagonist and the masked vigilante pulp heroes of Zorro and the Phantom.
The stuff that dreams are made of.
He was unlike any fictional protagonist that had come before, and thanks to that deadly genre smash that birthed the Caped Crusader over the course of those 80-some years, he's provided storytellers with the latitude to tell an infinite number of different Batman stories. We've gone over this, I have a whole video dedicated to this, but where the comics ran the gamut of Batman stories, The Dark Knight's time on the silver screen has primarily, to varying degrees, focused on the superhero element of the character's origin. This isn't to say that there aren't elements of the world's greatest detective sprinkled throughout Batman's filmography, but when you have that label, the world's greatest detective, and burst onto the scene in a run of comics quite literally called Detective Comics, well, maybe you gotta detect more. It's curious why filmmakers haven't tried to pursue that lead, dialing the noir meter all the way up and the pulp all the way down, or at least a little bit down. It's a combination that almost makes too much sense, and yet Matt Reeves is the first filmmaker to lean full tilt into the moody, brooding, psychological world of film noir. And he did it exceptionally. This sure is one hell of a detective story. One of the best. Hell, that almost makes it the best Batman film by default, even if I'm not quite ready to say that just yet.
Thank you.
3 hours, quick bursts of action, and then sustained sequences. People take issue with the Bat himself, even. They say he used to be a vampire. I don't know, feels like a natural transition to me, but I'm just one voice. YouTube's a big place. I can't be everywhere. So let's start here. This video is brought to you by Trade Coffee. But in order for us to go and punch a dude in the face 80 times and then have enough energy left afterwards to shrug off the entire clip of a machine gun, we're going to need coffee. But not just any coffee. Did you know that 90% of coffee from the grocery store is actually stale? That's right, 90%. We can do a lot better than that. Trade Coffee is here to find you the perfect cup. A Riddler latte that has the intensity of a Jim Gordon-led police raid every time you drink it. Trade sells the freshest roasted, ethically sourced beans from the best local roasters across America. It's even shipped in a backyard compostable bag. Holy coffee, Batman! Maybe you want exclusive geisha, or just need a quick pot of instant before work. Wherever your tastes land, Trade's combination of taste test experts and technology will pair you with your ideal coffee. And then you can order it as often as you like with free shipping. I've been a Trade subscriber for over 2 years now, and it was like night and day to go from drinking coffee as a thing to keep me awake to having the best coffee of my life. Seriously, guys, I cannot recommend Trade enough. I look forward to getting that little red bag every single week, and Trade has introduced me to some of my favorite roasters such as Greater Goods Coffee, Klatch, so much more, and they're always adding new roasters into the mix and broadening my horizons of what coffee can be week after week. So if you're a big coffee guy like myself, Trade is the must-have subscription for you. Right now, Trade is offering a total of $20 off your first 3 bags when you go to drinktrade.com/filmspeak or click the link in the description below. That's more than 16 cups of coffee for free. To get started, take their quiz at drinktrade.com/filmspeak and start your journey to your perfect cup. That's drinktrade.com/filmspeak for $20 off your first 3 bags. And thank you so much to Trade Coffee for sponsoring this video. So what have we got here? We've got a Batman movie on our hands. Guess that means different things to different people. But what does it mean to Matt Reeves? He started this after all. He lit the fuse that blew the powder keg. And he did it by packing in all of the ideas he could corral together from his love of cinema. He birthed the Batmobile from this twisted mesh of Christine and the 7-Ups. You want to tell a noir tale about 2 damaged people who know how to kick ass together? Well, Bogart and Bacall got there first. You won't find a more unlikely crime-stopping duo than Batman and Jim Gordon, but here they unite nonetheless. And yeah, All the President's Men, The French Connection, The Conversation beat him to the punch by about 50 years. But Reeves knows this. He doesn't pretend he was the first to come to these ideas. Instead, he takes them and twists them into something that is aesthetically and atmospherically new. But how? Well, he caked it all in fear. Fear dominates his filmmaking. Dating all the way back to Cloverfield, Reeves has had a fascination with the things that frighten us. Much of the reasoning behind his decision to shoot Cloverfield from a first-person POV stemmed from the idea of invoking terror through disorientation, through a lack of knowledge. The military and the government might have all the answers. They may know what's really going on, but your average person on the ground who's immediately thrust into a life-or-death situation isn't privy to that information. And so keeping the audience locked on them the whole time only further accentuates that dread. On another level, Cloverfield tackles the recursive loop of fear. Audiences didn't initially know that the monster was an infant thrust into a strange new world without its mother, and so is just lashing out because it's frightened, and in so doing, elicits a response from the people on the ground, from the military, to escalate the conflict and start shooting at it because they're frightened too. That only frightens the monster more in turn, and so the conflict just continues to escalate and escalate until it ends in nuclear holocaust. That is the extent to which fear can decimate society. The more I've sat with the Batman and this idea of fear begetting more fear, the easier it was to find a through line in Reeves's filmography, and now I truly think he has a fascination with the idea of fear, what it does to a person, how it's perpetual. A lot of the things he's tackled as a filmmaker have been centered around the things that frighten him, and so he almost uses that as an exercise into uncovering why. He's almost an extension of Batman in a sense. He's detective-like, and similar to Bruce, uses the idea of the thing that frightens him most as therapy, but also to say something more. His Planet of the Apes films particularly have so much in common with the Dark Knight trilogy. They're both explorations of the corrupting influence of fear, but with a markedly optimistic outlook on our ability to overcome and become something more than a victim of our fears. Reeves even stated he loves POV filmmaking, citing Scorsese films as the type of storytelling that fascinates him. Caesar, our POV character in the Apes films, was this outsider, an orphan, as Andy Serkis puts it. In Let Me In, the kid is incredibly isolated. In those other two films, Reeves explores what those characters turn to as coping mechanisms. In The Batman, it's the same thing. Bruce is turning to Batman as a coping mechanism. But because we're all different, because people are different and cope in different ways, some are more self-destructive than others.
I don't care what happens to me.
I think Caesar coped by way of forging his own family, his own community, and Bruce in this film is on the opposite end of that spectrum. He shuts himself away except to unleash Batman. It's a dangerous coping mechanism that he has to pull himself out from, but the key is it has to be himself who does it. Scars make you stronger is literally an idea Reeves has been meditating in forever. Koba in Dawn of the Planet of the Apes even has a line towards the beginning speaking to Caesar's son saying, "Scars make you strong." And while we're drawing comparisons from Dawn of the Planet of the Apes to the Batman, there's another line that says, "Fear makes others follow." The Riddler's whole MO becomes Falcone's own MO, Gotham City's whole MO. Reeves loves to take a look at who we are. Who's the animal in this story, he says, discussing Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. Are we the animal or are the apes the animal? The answer is we both are, and it's grappling with the different sides of ourselves and having to come to terms with the animal in all of us and to find a way to reconcile the parts of our nature and the struggle to do that. I think so much of this goes back to how he approached Batman. There's a touch of sadness and loneliness, the curse and torment of isolation, carrying the literal lyrical pain of Kurt Cobain's whisper as he strums the two-chord melody of Nirvana's Something in the Way.
If this continues, it won't be long before you've nothing left.
I don't care what happens to me.
The poignant closer to an album that brought about some of the biggest rock hits of all time is filled with an introspective, melancholic angst that echoes throughout the chamber of Bruce's mind. He's become the living embodiment of Nirvana's song. So much so, his own musical cue is indebted to Cobain's words. An angry, bitter man, haunted by pain, held captive by his trauma, consumed by his aimless crusade against the animals of the night. There's a reason Matt Reeves has spoken so prominently about Kurt Cobain's influence on Pattinson's Batman. This isn't the traditional billionaire playboy living a double life. This is a reclusive addict in pain, a reckless addict at that, whose thirst for revenge is his drug. As Reeves puts it, what if some tragedy happened, and this guy becomes so reclusive we don't know what he's doing? Is this guy some kind of wayward, reckless drug addict? And the truth is, he is a kind of drug addict. His drug is his addiction to his drive for revenge. He's like a Batman adopted by Kurt Cobain. He doesn't care about any of the trappings of being a Wayne at this point. To that end, forget the origin story. This is year 2. Reeves plunges us into a Gotham that lives in the shadows, a powder keg of fear, anger, corruption, and lies begging to be ignited. The streets are ravaged by gangs and murderers laced with drops, a new narcotic that's flooded the city. This Gotham is addicted to pain and violence, its damnation eternal. A guardian devil stands between Gotham and total darkness. Bruce has become more than just a vigilante. He's the embodiment of fear, an unhinged primal creature whose rage blinds him to the problems that plague Gotham City. Fear is a tool, Bruce narrates. It's a big city, I can't be everywhere. But they don't know where I am. They think I'm hiding in the shadows, but I am the shadows. Bruce's hard-boiled voiceover is gushing red as Reeves orchestrates a crescendo of fear and paranoia, lingering on the shadows and trembling faces of Gotham, striking terror in the heart of the audience as he shows us what it's like to be a criminal amidst this nightmare. Batman doesn't exist. He's simply
I'm vengeance.
Elemental and wicked, as if he's become nothing more than the word incarnate. There's nothing hopeful or inspiring about this Batman, his vision as red as the rain-soaked promotional material for the film. His anger is so blinding, such an intoxicating trip, that Bruce relies on various means to document the night. He has to force himself to remember the night. These are the actions of a man tormented by tragedy, someone consumed by the shadows, who numbs the pain by consuming a vice, that vice being the bat. Bruce feeds himself lies, saying it's to honor his mother and father and the principles they stood for, but the nobility of those claims lives in the shallows. This city is eating itself alive, Bruce says. Maybe it's beyond saving, but I have to try, push myself. Even Bruce admits to himself his crusade is a chore. He's raging against systemic injustice on such a granular level, breaking bones and bashing in skulls as if that's what will make a difference. He's unsure of how to propel past the ignition of his quest, blind revenge for the death of his parents. Like a rock star, Bruce's nights become nothing more than a release, a high, directionless fury, a vigilante's crusade founded upon principles he inevitably learns are lies themselves. Gotham is a city built on lies and addiction. The city's lawmakers perpetuate a narrative of renewal and salvation, but they're just finding new ways to push their product or funnel their money. Pretty words rendered meaningless. They're addicted to greed and power, nothing more than con artists repackaging the same old bullshit, but this time they've added hope and optimism. Save for a select few, no one seems to care, no one wants to do anything about it. What does it say when the district attorney would rather die than give up the informant in the Maroney case? A performative incarceration with ulterior motives that had the optics of justice, but was nothing more than a sideshow to keep the press and people satiated while the drug trafficking was absorbed by the rat. What does it say that cops and politicians would rather be in bed with the mob than fight against it? I guess if it keeps their pockets lined, right? Perhaps, but I think it goes deeper than that. It's the influence and power that informant has over the whole city. Again, it's fear. This city is addicted to fear. It craves it, is consumed by it, overdoses, and dies from it. Even those who seek to shake up the status quo and unmask the truth are agents of fear. Batman and the Riddler are both products of fear, using the element that burned down their lives and left them for dead as a weapon. They're just looking to settle the score. Just as violence begets more violence, in the case of Gotham City, fear begets more fear. Mayoral candidate Bella Real calls Bruce Wayne's wealth, influence, and privilege into question, saying he could be doing more to help clean up the city. In Bruce's mind, he is helping because that brutality is the language of the city. In a bleak sense, he's the vigilante Gotham deserves. His rage is self-serving, a coping mechanism, and while, yes, Bruce could be using his daylight persona to do a bit of good, he's so disinterested in being Bruce Wayne that it isn't worth the effort. His life as Bruce Wayne is nothing more than the come-down, the post-vigilante hangover. Why be ignored as a mere man, flesh and blood, when he can exercise that bottled-up rage into a symbol of fear? It's not just a signal, it's a warning. But what message does that send? That chaos, lawlessness, and violence are the only means to combat institutionalized corruption and justice? To salvage a decaying city? Both Bruce and Riddler were orphans. However, the contrast between a wealthy orphan and one who grew up in the slums on the streets, witnessing the decay of the city firsthand as it consumed him and his peers, is what separates them. The whole concept of the renewal plan enacted by Thomas Wayne was utter bullshit. A way for the mob and corrupt cops and government officials to launder money under a non-profit without oversight. Renewal has been a thing for over 20 years in the city, and all it's become is a fantasy, a joke, a lie. The only people it benefited were the elites. The Riddler is a microcosm of the damage the renewal plan actually caused. So is Bruce. Bruce may have had it easier than Riddler, but his father and mother were killed by Falcone. Or maybe they were just killed by a nameless thug. Who knows? But for what? For growing a conscience and attempting to own up to the mistakes they made. But even to that end, the corruption guided them. Thomas enlisted Falcone to take care of the journalist smearing Martha's name in the headlines. In the wake of inadvertently creating a murder, Thomas was killed for trying to do the right thing, leaving Bruce scared and alone. Just like Riddler, only with the attention of the press. You see, when the untouchables, the wealthy elite, people in positions of power are targeted, that's the only time that things seem to shift, things seem to matter. It's the only time people are willing to take a look at the problems that are really going on and say, we need to make a change. Riddler recognizes the hypocrisy. Fear and anger is what shaped the childhoods of both Bruce and Edward Nashton. Edward may claim he wants reform, but all he's doing is combating fear with more fear. In a film about unmasking the truth, the Riddler is nothing more than a product inspired by Batman's brutality and violence. His so-called noble intentions to fix the city turn into pure chaos and insurrection. There are actual, noble, fearless, progressive voices fighting to pull Gotham out of the darkness and into the light, like Bella Real or Jim Gordon. They put their lives on the line without a mask, and even in a hopelessly lost city, continue to fight, because the city needs to see that not everyone is afraid, that there are people willing to stand tall against injustice and corruption, and do it without a mask. Riddler may act like he wants to shake things up and enact change, but when he targets the very people who are actually doing something about the situation in Gotham, he shows his true face. A bitter, sad man who's angry at the world because it doesn't bow down or coddle him. What was once a sympathetic orphan boy becomes an insecure anarchist. He's the anti-Batman, the anti-Bruce Wayne. But even Bruce is struggling with his own unbridled rage. What separates him from someone like Edward Nashton, though, is his disdain for guns, killing, and violence. Bruce is still part of the problem, both as Bruce Wayne and Batman, but he's taken the death of his parents and used that as fuel for his crusade. The problem is, he's in so much pain, has so much anger inside him that he doesn't know what to do with it. He's too focused on punishing the criminals and corruption on a micro scale that he becomes blind to the big picture, the real people and issues holding the city back. He can beat up faceless goons all day long, but there will always be more stooges to come in and replace the ones he scared off. It's just like how when Falcone, the cops, mayor, and DA gave up Maroni to construct an illusion of progress. They just replaced him with Penguin. Nothing meaningful changed. The Riddler even calls out his tunnel vision by telling Batman that he's missing the big picture. Bruce is to learn that his actions have consequences, either unintended or otherwise. His reign of terror as vengeance inspired a legion of domestic terrorists hell-bent on burning Gotham and democracy with it to the ground right before real change was finally going to get a chance. When he becomes the Batman, Bruce becomes a beacon of hope, an inspiration to the citizens of Gotham that they don't have to be afraid, that they can take a stand against corruption and injustice, that together they can accomplish wonders and save this city. It's not an easy journey, and the city is quite literally fractured in two by the end of it. Things were always going to get worse before they get better, but the fight is always worth fighting. It must be fought for those who succeed us. Bruce might be only subconsciously aware of this, but it comes through when it counts. Take his interactions with the mayor's orphaned son, particularly how he saves his life twice without hesitation. Once when he doesn't even have the batsuit to protect himself with. This is Bruce constantly seeing himself in the boy and doing what he can to inspire and guide him. Selina Kyle, on the other hand, represents a lot of us. She doesn't see a point in trying to salvage a lost cause, especially one that stripped away everything from her, her mom, her best friend, and then left her for dead and without a means for survival. She's fallen into apathy, and while someone like Bella Real is speaking out and doing her part to save the city, Selina sees her as someone who's nothing more than words and will eventually fall in line like her predecessors. Like Bruce and Ed, she's also angry, she wants revenge, but it's more direct. She doesn't give a shit about the city because, as far as she's concerned, it deserves to eat itself alive. But she does want the monster directly responsible for her pain to pay for his sins. As opposed to Bruce Wayne and Edward Nashton, her rage is far more direct and calculated and, truthfully, aimed at the right person. But killing Falcone out of revenge won't bring her peace. As Bruce tells her, once you cross that line, you become no better than them. For as much as Bruce is battling for the soul of Gotham, and himself, he's also fighting to save the soul of someone he cares for, someone who sees him for him, and he sees the same way. Bruce is on what seems to be an eternal crusade to save his city, while Selina operates out of love and passion for the ones around her. She's selfless, but only to the ones she loves, because in this big, fucked up world, that's all that matters. The big things, the institutional problems, they're a lost cause, better to live for herself. She saves Bruce at the end of the film not because she cares about saving Gotham, but because she cares about Bruce Wayne. It's why at the end they have to part ways. While her and Bruce could run off to Bloodhaven and shake up petty criminals for fun, Bruce's city calls to him. His duty, his quest, his crusade calls to him, and as long as he's Batman, Selina will never have him to herself. The Batman is a film about unmasking the true nature of oneself. Riddler Unmasked is just an anarchist. He doesn't want change, he just wants to burn the whole thing down. He comes in pretending to be a revolutionary, but when you unmask him, he's just a bitter, sad Reddit loser lashing out, same as his followers. Instead of doing the hard work to enact change, backing someone like Real, they just resort to terrorism. Same with Bruce. Batman is nothing more than vengeance, which is what makes his self-realization so much more palpable towards the end. Everyone is unmasked by someone else in this film, because they're hiding who they really are. That's not the case for Bruce. The truth is, much like the Nirvana song, there is something in the way preventing Bruce from reaching his destination, preventing him from becoming more than just a vigilante, but also the hero he spends most of the film thinking he is. In the song, in real life, it can be assumed that the something in the way was Kurt Cobain himself. In the Batman, that something is Bruce. Both may have their different ways of coping to ease the pain brought about by trauma, isolation, and loneliness that all of us feel, especially in our younger years, but only they can cure themselves. How can one be helped by anyone else if the problem was themselves all along? There could be a way, but that's the question Bruce must reconcile with if he is to truly become the Batman. And as you can imagine, that self-recognition doesn't come easy. It takes him coming face to face with a terrorist, perverting his words, "I'm vengeance," his symbol, turning it into malicious propaganda in order for him to come to terms with the mess he's made, the evil he's inspired. In that moment of realization, Bruce Wayne, for the first time in the film, decides to act as the hero, saving innocent lives from the fallout of the Riddler's reign of terror. In Bruce's closing words, "Vengeance won't change the past. I have to become something more. People need hope. This city is angry, scarred, like me, but scars can transform us." Bruce chooses to take the horrors of his past and channel that frustration and sorrow into finally, actually enacting change, becoming a beacon of hope for a bleeding city on the road to recovery. Bruce chooses to become the Batman. The 2020s thus far have been a shit show. A pandemic separated us. An environmental crisis is intensifying. The US, a country already divided, continues to deal with deeply entrenched racism, police brutality, hate, and now an insurrection, a borderline second civil war as hatred attempts to take over. There's so much anger and pain. People are scared. People have lost hope. For so long, we've been trying to figure out what exactly the blockbusters of the 2020s are going to be like. What are they going to say? How are they going to engage with the nightmare going on around us? Well, luckily for us, Matt Reeves figured it out. He took one of the most popular comic book heroes of all time and tapped into the very anger, pain, and fear that allowed him to rise up and become something more. Not vengeance, but hope. The Batman, in the process, arrives as the first real defining blockbuster of the 2020s. It speaks to who we are as a society right now. Right now, we may be Gotham City at the end of this film, but Batman is the shining example of who we can be. We will long have the pain and scars that tore us apart, but with them, we have something more. A reminder to work towards progress, not to let those scars multiply and consume us. Our resilience and spirit can triumph in the end, will triumph, but only if we give it the effort it deserves. Matt Reeves did his part with the masterpiece that is The Batman. I'm gonna try and do mine. The internet's a big place. I can't be everywhere, but I can start here.